So just to add to what I was saying before, sorry, I want to say this. Talk to a kid about money. Find a 5-year-old. And then when that 5-year-old comes to you and says, Daddy, what is money? Try to answer that question and see what follow-up question it creates. I guarantee you that most adults in this country will start the conversation with, Daddy, what is money? And within 15 minutes, they're going to be, listen, Daddy's busy. Let's turn on Nickelodeon and see if Finding Nemo is on again, right? Because they've run out of answers. Because they realize that none of the answers they're giving this kid make any sense. Because the kid will ask the questions that you and all of us as adults don't ask. And the reason we don't ask is because we take them for granted. So suddenly you find yourself as if you're a fish trying to explain water to another fish. You're like, well, it's everywhere. What do you mean it's everywhere? You can't really explain a cultural technology that has existed for possibly hundreds of thousands of years and is so embedded in every aspect of our culture that you start getting indoctrinated in it in your, first years of life, and then you stop thinking about it by the time you're 10. And none of your questions are ever answered. So try doing that. It's really fun. Actually, I've had this conversation with a couple of kids. There's a kid running around in the audience. Bruce, I don't know if you can lend us Alexander for a bit, but yeah, well, we can use him for a panel. And all of us have to explain money to Alexander. It's a great experience. Try it.
Go ahead.
Hello, my name is Sean Wilkinson with Storage. In terms of the wording portion, it's very interesting discussing money with someone who uses and understands Bitcoin and an average person. You start getting into the wording, you talk with a normal person about money, but when you talk about someone who understands Bitcoin, it's just like, oh yeah, I'll pay you 20 fiat dollars instead of I'll pay you $20. You start making that distinction. And I always find that quite funny. My question is more on the economy of Bitcoin. As it grows, do you see it eating away at the traditional economy or developing perhaps a parallel economy to the regular economy? For example, myself, I get paid my salary completely in Bitcoin. I try to use Bitcoin as much as I can to buy my basic needs. So I'm curious if we, as Bitcoiners, start developing our own economy that's kind of closed off, that we have some on-ramps and exit ramps.
Yeah, I think both are going to happen, actually. I don't see why they're inconsistent with each other either. And I'm in a strange position of being a moderate in the Bitcoin space. I have friends that are part of they think that the Bitcoin is the darknet currency, and that it's anarchism is embedded in the protocol, and let's not let go of that. And I'm like, yeah, that sounds great, And then I have other friends of mine that are like, well, we really probably ought to be talking to the regulators to make sure they don't utterly destroy us completely. And if we can sort of be friends with them, maybe, and on speaking terms, then maybe they'll let us live a little bit longer, and we can have a bit, a little greater chance of success. And I'm like, well, I kind of get that point too, And I don't necessarily think that these are inconsistent, so long as one side is not so long as the pro-regulation side is not out to jail my friend Cody Wilson or something like that, then I'm okay. It's fine, whatever. But I noticed that already you're starting to see this strange structure of coming about. I was just on a Bitcoin shop, not a Bitcoin shop. It was just a regular illicit marketplace like any other, and. What was I doing there? Yeah, I can't tell you. But they had a lot of products that you could buy with a credit card, but there were some products that they would only accept Bitcoin for, actually, and they would specify them on the same web page. So it's really interesting. One of the things I wanted to say about Bitcoin adoption, have you noticed this? And this is one of the reasons I'm very confident about the future. Anyone who's used Bitcoin, even one time, feels very cool. It's like a moment in your life. You just don't forget it, and you get attached to it very quickly. I didn't feel that way about many of the technologies that are now dominant, but Bitcoin converts very fast.
Well, that's a new thing for technology for me, because the last technology that I used that was as groundbreaking as this was in 1992 or 1993, and it was NCSA Mosaic, and I can tell you everybody who was using that technology was very, very not cool. Anyway, to the point of creating your own economy, I think that is a critical point that most people don't get. And so let me give you an analogy. If you went back to the early 90s and you looked at the internet, the conversation at the time was how the internet would affect the telephone network. And so we would measure it based on replacing existing telecommunications media. So how many phone calls are happening on the internet versus on the analog network? Or if you like it in a simpler analogy, how many faxes has the internet replaced, right? And sure, that's a fine metric. And measuring how many faxes the internet has replaced up to a certain point makes sense, because it's enabling that type of information transfer to happen more efficiently. But the problem with having that conversation is that people start believing two things. One, they start believing that to understand the internet is to understand a slightly more sophisticated, cooler kind of fax machine. And two, they start thinking that to measure the replacement rate of faxes gives you an idea of what the internet economy is. And at some point, that no longer became the relevant metric. At some point, the internet enabled things that could not be done before. And that's when the real internet economy started. Now, what I want to point out is in Bitcoin, we make the same mistake, which is how much fiat shopping velocity are we replacing with Bitcoin shopping velocity? How many e-commerce stores? So PayPal adopted it. When will Amazon start taking Bitcoin? And that is the exact same metric as how many fax machines is the internet replacing. It's useful only up to a point. Because the really cool thing about Bitcoin is not when it starts replacing Amazon shopping, but when it creates its own economic activity that couldn't be done before. When it creates cross-border trade with countries that were disconnected, when it brings online the other 6 billion who were invisible in the global economy for the most part, when it enables applications that we haven't imagined, like storage that you're working on, or multi-signature escrow that you can't do without a lawyer right now, or whatever else it may be. A lot of applications we haven't even possibly imagined. So at the same time that we were asking the question, how many fax machines does the internet replace? None of us could even imagine a world of websites, couldn't imagine a world of online banking, couldn't imagine Amazon, and most certainly could not imagine Facebook, Twitter, the Egyptian revolution, and watching Hong Kong streaming footage from a drone run by activists on the ground from across the world in real time. And that's not a fax machine anymore. So when we start asking the question, what economic activity is Bitcoin creating? And the thing is, it's already creating economic activity now, because many of the jobs we're doing in Bitcoin are not jobs that we would be doing anyway if we worked for Visa. They're not jobs that we would be doing anyway in another industry. This industry is already generating its own economic activity. And the really interesting thing is what happens when some of the early Bitcoin millionaires take their money and instead of saying, fuck it, I'm going to Bermuda, they say, I'm going to invest in 19 startups this year. And I know several of them who have done exactly that. And what they're doing is they're using the liquidity and the velocity created within a fake money system to generate real economic activity that is completely novel and that didn't convert any fiat at all. And once that started happening, and it's already been happening now for almost a year, the game changed. Because now the Bitcoin economy exists completely separately from converting the fiat economy, and that's magical.
Thank you.
Thank you all both for coming. That was an awesome panel, and I've had the pleasure of interviewing both of you. And I want to ask you a question. Maybe I've asked you before, but I'm going to modify it just a little bit. So what do you view as the greatest hindrances to mass adoption, generationally speaking? What are some of the differences that you see, I guess, different generations struggling with as far as jumping on board with Bitcoin or just blockchain technology?
I mean, we've all noticed this generational difference, right? I mean, this is not just speculation. We all know that it's true. But I can't stop going back to the email analogy, you know, for a very long time, because I remember a time when email was not, you know, I mean, it wasn't mainstream at all. It took about 20 years to go from the first experiments to the point that everybody was using it for whatever. And in between, there was a lot of hysteria about spam and porn and, you know, you name it. You know, I remember Congress made spam illegal at some point. I don't know if you remember that. That was an incredible moment in history. And it was about the same time that, like, basically the markets had solved the problem anyway. But I definitely noticed this difference. I have friends of mine who are in high school who actually use Bitcoin all the time. And they are unused to normal money transmission slowness and speed, and they're appalled when they discover it. You know, if you have to send them PayPal, they think it's just an anachronism. If you do a bank transfer, they laugh about it and think, what is it with these old people and their stupid bank transfers? This is idiotic, you know. So I love this stuff. So there's definitely a demographic issue at work here. I'm sure all of you have felt this. I don't know if Andreas would say this. I mean, you seem to be a little more patient with this, but sometimes I wake up and I go, damn it, why isn't the whole world using Bitcoin today? You know, we all know what's cool about it, and it gets frustrating. I do think there's going to have to be a time passage here. I mean, definitely history's on fast forward. I mean, if you think about it, I mean, nobody ever heard the word Bitcoin until 5 years ago. I mean, that's kind of an amazing period of time. And within the last year, my God, you know, the development has just been unbelievable. But still, to those of us in the know, to those of us who live in this world and use it all the time, it seems slow and ponderous, and, you know, it's like one meetup after another, one conference after another, you know. But actually, history is on fast forward, and the ground is shifting beneath our feet. By any historical standard, we're living through incredibly revolutionary times, and I think it's good for us to remember that, think about it, and be, quite frankly, we should be overjoyed about it.
The people who need Bitcoin the most don't have the infrastructure for it. That's the simple truth. I've talked about the other 6 billion, and I want to go back to it for just a second and explain what I mean by that phrase, the other 6 billion, because to me, that's the core message for Bitcoin. The World Bank estimates that there are 2.5 billion people in the world who are classified as unbanked, and that classification has 2 caveats with it. One, they're only counting working age adults. And 2, they consider banked any form of financial service that someone has access to. Now, I make a distinction, which is I distinguish between the type of banking we have, which I would like to call kind of power banking. This is the kind of banking that, you know, 50 years ago only Carnegie had. This is the kind of banking that allows me to go online today, open a brokerage account online, use that to access the Shanghai markets, buy one of their new stocks, then trade in some yen, transfer that yen to my local account, move money across the world with few currency restrictions, open as many accounts as I want, pretty much use that account in any way I want. I can trade internationally. I can send and receive money across the world with very, very few restrictions. That's power banking. And in my estimation, probably only about 1 billion to 2 billion people have that. So North America, Northern Europe, and a tiny sliver of the elite in places like China, Russia, etc. And the rest of the world have plebe banking. And plebe banking is where you have a checking account, but you don't have any credit. So it's cash. It's essentially asset only. You can't do credit. There's no liquidity to give you or extend you credit, or it's very difficult to access that. You can only use one currency, your national currency. You're restricted from sending or receiving money anywhere in the world, and if you do, then there's a lot of paperwork, and a lot of intermediaries are going to take a cut of that money. You can't trade on any markets anywhere, not even your own country's market in most cases. And probably about 60 million people in the US have plea banking, and probably another 3 billion people around the world have plea banking. So if you add that all up, that's the other 6 billion. It's the people who have either no banking at all or a modicum of very, very limited services that effectively mean that they're cut off from economic activity around the world. They can't participate in global trade, they can't participate in global liquidity pools, they can't receive credit, they can't invest in companies, they can't start companies, they can't do any of those things. Of the other 6 billion, about 1 billion already have internet. And they have the ability to get Bitcoin now, but again, there are legal issues, there are political issues, there are other restrictions. A lot of the rest don't have internet, don't have data capabilities. They may have feature phones. The most popular phone in the world is the Nokia 1000. There's almost 2 billion of them right now, and it's the old chocolate bar style Nokia phone. They're indestructible and they're everywhere. So there's a gap. There's a gap between what Bitcoin is today and how it can be used and what the requirements are to use it. So if in order to use Bitcoin fully, you need a smartphone with a gig data plan in order to download or access servers that have 20 gigs of blockchain, then that's going to keep it restricted to very few people. But the real people who need it don't have any of that technology. So the most important thing we can do to make Bitcoin work is to take the blockchain technology and down-tech it, while at the same time understanding that the incentive to have fully globally connected banking will actually push people to invest in local infrastructure. They have a reason to get a data plan. Because if getting a data plan means that your phone turns into a Bloomberg terminal and a bank terminal and a lending terminal, then suddenly that data plan is worth buying, even if that data plan has to carry another 1,000 people in your community off SMS. So that's why Bitcoin has not been adopted yet, because the people who can have it really don't need it. And the people who do need it can't yet have it. But that gap is narrowing dramatically every day that goes by. And at some point it reaches a tipping point, and then magical things happen.
That's a great answer.
All right, guys. I have to make an announcement. So we're going over time here on this. So this is absolutely the last panel of the day. And as long as Jeffrey and Andreas are willing to stay here and answer questions, you guys are welcome to answer them. I'll kind of let them field their own, how they feel on that. But we're about to break for dinner whenever this is finished. And then at 8 o'clock, burnturn.eu, which is a sponsor of this conference, and this is the most value-priced Bitcoin conference that has ever existed, and we're very happy to be able to do that. Our sponsor, burnturn.eu, is hosting a charity poker tournament. It will be right out here in the hallway area. All proceeds from that go to benefit Sean's Outpost, which is my homeless charity. So it's a $20 minimum buy-in. Every cent of that, every Satoshi of that goes towards Sean's Outpost. However, BurnTurn has put a 2 Bitcoin winner-take-all purse on the poker tournament. So whoever wins the poker tournament today will be walking out with a cold 2 Bitcoin. There's going to be a cash bar out there. It's just going to be a good time, 8 o'clock, and we're going to have live entertainment by Whitey Cracker, the Bitcoin Baron himself. So if guys want to go out and get some dinner after this is done, please come back at 8 o'clock, participate in the poker tournament. And if you are interested in the poker tournament, there's a sign-up at the registration booth if you just want to go ahead and get signed up for it. And I'll let you guys get back to questions. Thank you.
I've got about, 5 more minutes? I've got to get on the radio here in a little bit. But you want 5 more minutes? Yeah, just a few more minutes? Just real quick? Go ahead.
Afternoon, gents.
These guys have been waiting in line a long time, so I don't want to cut it off. Go ahead.
It's pretty comfortable. Could be tougher. Somewhere in Africa, just like what you were talking about with some of that mobile banking. So there's been a lot of discussion today and a lot of concern about inflation, unemployment, domestic and Western economic problems. Federal Reserve running out of control, ECB not getting a handle on how to balance the euro. You know, these are problems. But they're not what keeps me up at night. What keeps me up at night is the growing convergence of the economic parity between the US and China, Britain and India, the Netherlands and Indonesia. We see the East growing closer and closer in economic output parity between these two very different spheres of the world. Now, my question comes from 40 years ago, in 1970, it took the economic output of 25 people in China to equal 1 American. Today it's 6. Within not too many years it'll be 2, and before you know it, it'll be 1 to 1. My question is, how can Bitcoin and blockchain technology help support and get these Western economies out of their current stagnation and help maintain the West's current place in economic parity to the East? It's a difficult one, but I hope you'll be open with me.
Well, in my case, I'm really glad to see an end to the American empire. So, that doesn't concern me so much. But I tell you what, though, there is a tremendous political stagnation, both here and in Europe. It's like there are many smart people who understand what the problem is, but not many mechanisms to do anything about it. I would say the most important thing for the U.S. right now is deregulation. The regulatory books are so stuffed full of 100 years worth of crufty laws that are just bogging down everything from product regulation to patent regulation to labor controls, impositions on business. It's just crazy. It's getting very, very difficult to live your life, actually, in the U.S. And the police state is totally out of control. And nobody really knows what mechanisms on the political system to really push to make this happen. I mean, we've got terrible political problems both here in the U.S. and all over Western Europe, that the people who benefit from the system are the people who are running this system. And there's a growing chasm. You talk about the chasm between the U.S. and the growing chasm between the U.S. and China, and et cetera. But I mean, there's a growing chasm between the rulers and the ruled in this country, and nobody really knows what to do about that. And I'm not sure what the answer really is, except for growing peer-to-peer innovation. I think within the Bitcoin space and within the peer-to-peer sharing economy, we see a really bright light. It's practically the only one, really. Because otherwise, there's massive stagnation. You're exactly right about that. I don't like the idea of political revolution, by the way. I'm convinced that people who have a hope for this, I mean, like real revolution, are basically very dangerous. And I don't have. I mean, the American Revolution actually turned out pretty badly. Actually, it turns out, So I don't long for that. What I'd like to see is innovation take place at the pace at which the ruling class essentially becomes obsolete. That's what I fully expect to see.
Party's over. Your standard of living is about to be radically downgraded. I think that's the case for most Western economies because that's the natural cycle of economies. And so I, for one, welcome our new overloads. 你好，我会说普通话. I am learning Mandarin. I welcome you. I can consult on cryptocurrencies. Upgrade your skills. Because the reason that economic parity is happening is because people are willing to work harder for less money. And so the only hope we have as pampered Westerners is that their standard of living accelerates as fast as their economic productivity so that they can no longer do that job for as little as they do it. Because if they continue to do that job as well as they do it at their current standard of living, of course they can outcompete us. And so all empires eventually grow fat and complacent, and in most cases, literally so.
Wonderful talk, you guys, as always.
I just wanted to ask what you were following in the 2.0 space, and if you could briefly maybe discuss what you think is the more important projects right now, or who's accomplishing the most in that sort of sector.
I actually hate the term 2.0, primarily because it kind of implies a radical break with the past, whereas in fact I see it as a natural continuum. To the point that we were talking about before about what the regulators are doing, I think it's really amusing that the regulators are currently trying to evaluate what to do about Bitcoin 2008. It's like blockchain technology. It's like, well, in the meantime, tree chains, side chains, scripting languages, contract languages, smart contracts, multi-sig, escrow capabilities, ring join, coin join, dark coin, dark wallet, 500 different altcoins, proof of stake, proof of work, proof of publishing, proof of this, proof of that. We've moved on. They're barely catching up with, oops, decentralized consensus is about to destroy our central banking, and already the cryptocurrency space has now progressed 5 years in terms of research, and it's not discontinuous. It's not a new wave of Bitcoin. Bitcoin 2010 was a new wave of Bitcoin from Bitcoin 2008, and every year since, every one of the innovations that has happened represents not only a continuous moving front of technology, but one that is accelerating and diversifying at an incredible rate. And so I find it amusing, not only that we kind of minimize it and say Bitcoin 2.0, as when in fact, if anything, it's like Bitcoin 253.0 and alt. And then, the fact that at the same time the regulators are talking about, well, is Bitcoin really anonymous or is it not anonymous? Well, it doesn't matter because there's 500 other coins, and if you stomp on one, 300 more will emerge, and they'll be nastier and stealthier than the previous 200 because you just stomped on them. So welcome. It's called evolution, and you're a dinosaur. That's really the discussion.